Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and you are very welcome to this curator's introductory talk of Turner as Inspiration, which is the National Gallery of Ireland's annual Turner Show for 2026. I'm sure many of you would be delighted to see our Turners return to us again, having spent last January in the National Gallery of Scotland at Edinburgh. So very much looking forward to seeing them myself and seeing the show. Anne Hodge will be giving the talk today, and I will come back at the end. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the question and answer box. If you're watching this on YouTube, you're always welcome to ask us any questions that you can. You can email education@ngi.ie and we will get them to the right people because we really love to be able to interact with our visitors. And I know that many of you watch this from far away and you can't actually get to the show. So I do hope that this is worthwhile for you and that you enjoy it. And if you'd like to get started on that, I'll pop up at the end, as I said, and I might mention a few of the other things that we have going on with the exhibition as well. So I will disappear now when this is up and running. Gorgeous.
Great. Thank you very much, Joanne, and welcome to everyone who's watching this live or on video later. And I'm really excited to have our Turners back in the National Gallery of Ireland this year after their little outing to Edinburgh last year. So really, over the next 45 minutes or so, I'm going to speak to you about just to remind you of the history of the Vaughan bequest a little bit and to look at some of the really magnificent watercolors that we have by the British artist J.M.W. Turner, Joseph Mallord William Turner. And he was born in 1775 and died in 1851. And really, he's one of the biggest names in terms of British art, I suppose, ever, you might say. Most people are familiar with him a little bit. So without further ado, I'll move through the, now that's just not moving through. Oh, it is. Great. Thank God. I always have a little mini heart attack when the thing doesn't move through. Right. So the Vaughan bequest. Now, as some of you are very familiar, and forgive me if this is all, you know it all so well, but we might have a few people who haven't come across the Vaughan bequest or aren't that familiar. Well, Henry Vaughan was an English collector. He was just a very wealthy man. His father was a hat manufacturer and his grandfather before him. But Henry didn't have to work because there was so much money in the family. So he could indulge his interest in art, and he built up a magnificent collection of works of art, a lot of British art, and in particular contemporary art. So he collected works by J.M.W. Turner and also John Constable. And you might be familiar with the Constable's painting The Hay Wain, which is now in the National Gallery, London. And it was actually Henry Vaughan who gifted that to the nation while he was still alive, actually. But he was very generous. So when he was drawing up his will, he decided that he would divide up his collection of Turner watercolors, which were really exquisite, very good examples of Turner's work from his early days as a sort of teenager almost, right up to the 1840s. And Vaughan decided to divide them up between the national galleries of Great Britain and Ireland. So Edinburgh, Dublin, and London. And he gave 38 to the National Gallery in Edinburgh, 31 came to us, and 23 went to London. And you can see on the screen there just an extract from the wording of his will. He was very insistent that they would be exhibited to the public and that they could be copied. So that meant copied by students of art, people who were interested in Turner, that they would be allowed to come into the gallery and, you know, make studies and draw from the watercolors. And you see they're subject to the same rules and regulations as the drawings in the Fitzwilliam Museum. And it was Ruskin, John Ruskin, Turner's great champion and a writer about art. He was the person who had gifted his own collection of Turner watercolors to the Fitzwilliam Museum. And in his will, he stated that, they should be carefully looked after and exhibited to the public at certain times and so on. So Vaughan is just harking back to that and, sort of hoping that they would be looked after as well as the works in Cambridge. And that idea or stipulation that they should only be shown in January was because in Victorian times, galleries were naturally lit. So there were windows in the galleries, and you would have bright sunlight, maybe 200 up to 500 lux coming in the windows, fading things. Oil paintings are fine. They don't suffer so much from exposure to light, but watercolors do. And Vaughan was very aware of this thanks to Ruskin's writings. And he decided that he would stipulate they were only to be shown in January when the light, of course, is at its lowest level. We're all suffering from that now, and it's going to continue for a little while with the very little light during the daytime. And again, this whole idea of philanthropy and hoping that everyone could enjoy them, he insisted that they would be exhibited free of charge. So we will never, ever charge people to see our Turner watercolors. So that's the cabinet. In fact, I'm speaking to you from the Princeton Drawing Study Room. And behind me, I don't know, can you see it? But it's actually right behind me. And we had a beautiful conservation job done on the cabinet for its outing to Edinburgh, because the cabinet went, it was packed up and went off to the National Galleries of Scotland last year. And before that, the gallery employed a man called Fergus Purdy, who you can see on your screens there. I'm sure he won't thank me for putting this snap up on the screen, but he is a wonderful furniture conservator. He's based in Belfast in the Cathedral Quarter. That's where his studio is. And he came and did a really beautiful job on our cabinet, because it is oak, but at some point in the, I don't know, 70s or 80s, certainly before my time, it was varnished with a really horrible mahogany varnish. So he brought it back to its original glory, and you can see it there very beautifully. Also, just to mention, as you probably or may not be aware, the cabinet is filled with frames which slide in and out very beautifully. It's a really well-made piece of furniture, piece of cabinet making. We don't know who the maker was, most likely an English maker. It was probably made in London, but there are no labels or anything like that. But when the collection came to Dublin, they came in this cabinet. So the 31 watercolors were all inside, very safe. They came by sea, of course, across the Irish Sea. And yeah, we are the only gallery which has a cabinet like this. There doesn't seem to have been another. And I actually think that probably the cabinet was not made especially for Vaughan's Turner watercolors. I would guess that it was made almost as a traveling cabinet, so that things maybe perhaps were transported, or yes, certainly it was used for storage as well. But the reason I say that it wasn't made specially for the Turners is that on the back of one of the frames, and it's the work numbered 2406, you can see there, it might be a little bit difficult to see, but there's a pen inscription on the back. It's quite faded, and it says Cox D, Haystack, and Haycock. And underneath, then there's kind of a slightly difficult to read, but I think it says Vaughan. And I think Henry Vaughan wrote this on the back of the frame. And at that time, whenever that was, he had a watercolor by David Cox in that frame. And I'll just show you, I think in the next image, this may be the watercolor that was in that frame, the Haystack from 1849. So it's just, obviously I researched the collection particularly when we were working on our catalogue, which was published in 2017. But we're always looking into the collection and finding new bits of information. And our lives are made much easier by the fact that there are so many Turner experts out there who are very generous with their knowledge, and they share what they've discovered with us, which is really wonderful. People like Ian Worrell and Cecilia Powell, and so on. But anyway, I just thought you might like to see what I think is the watercolor that might have sat in that in one of the frames in that cabinet during Henry Vaughan's time. And what a magnificent haystack. I don't think I've ever seen a haystack that big. And in fact, I didn't realize that that's the kind of construction that that was made in the mid 19th century. And just to mention David Cox, I just thought I'd throw in that image there on the right. This is not in our collection. Neither of these works obviously are in the National Gallery of Ireland's collection. But this is David Cox made watercolors for a book that was published called The Young Artist's Companion. So it was kind of a manual on how to draw. And that's just the title page, or the cover actually, which I thought was quite lovely. But it just gives you a sense of how popular watercolor painting was. Amateurs, were interested in doing their own watercolors. And of course, the work of professionals like J.M.W. Turner and David Cox was highly prized and would have been exhibited, and also sold for display in private houses and so on. Now, to go back to the collection itself. So as I mentioned, our collection, we have 31 watercolors, 30 watercolors in fact, and one graphite drawing. And what's really unique about this collection is that it spans the whole of Turner's career, from the 1790s when he, was a very young man, right up to the end of his career, the 1840s. And he continued working nearly until his death. He last exhibited at the Royal Academy in 1850, and then he died the following year. So he was just an artist who couldn't stop. He loved creating images and did it continuously throughout his life. So I have these two works on the screen just to remind you of the diversity of work in the collection. And of course, the beech trees on the left, the beech trees Norbury Park, one of my favorite works in the collection, and it shows Turner at a very young age. So you just remember he was born in 1775. So he's, about 22 or so, 21, 22, when he made this watercolor. It's very much of its time. It's quite conventional. There were many other artists doing work of this type. And its characteristics are, of course, that it's very true to life. You know at a glance that this is a magnificent beech tree. There's no question. It's very accurate. There are a few little things that he puts in you may not be able to see, but just to the right of the trunk, there are two tiny figures in the distance. And this is something Turner often did. He puts in human beings who look terribly insignificant beside the magnificence of nature. And this is a really good example. So he would have gone to Norbury Park first, I think, when he was even a little bit younger. And he was commissioned by the owner of Norbury Park, who was a sculptor called William Locke. He was commissioned to make drawings in Locke's fern house. He collected ferns and propagated them. But of course, then Turner used his time very wisely and did some really beautiful drawings within the park itself. And on the right then, one of the latest works that we have in the collection. And this is from a Venetian trip from 1840, and it's the Doge's Palace and Piazzetta. So you can see how radically different. And I think if you knew nothing about Turner and you saw the two of these works together, you'd say, oh yeah, well, two different artists. But it shows how his work developed, how it became, how he developed his own very distinctive style. He was, of course, renowned for experimentation, and he just would use anything to create a mark or to create an effect, and everything from washing sheets or dipping sheets wholesale into baths of color, then taking them out, drying them, and working back into them. And his Venetian scenes have beautiful detail added with red ink, which is quite unusual. But whatever he does, it's to create atmosphere and to create a real sense of place. And any of you who have been lucky enough to get to Venice will see how he captured it brilliantly. That greeny blue color of the water, that is the way the canals look in certain lights, and he captures it magnificently. So we'll go back in time now to when Turner was a very young man. And I thought you might like to see on the left-hand side there. This is, well, it's attributed to Thomas Munro, and it is supposedly an image of Turner as a very young man drawing in Munro's house. So Thomas Munro was a medical doctor who had a huge interest in art, and he collected watercolors, and he was a great promoter of the watercolor technique. So he had a great collection himself. And he also borrowed, especially from an artist called John Robert Cozzens. He borrowed Cozzens's sketchbooks, and then he invited young artists, including J.M.W. Turner and also Girton, Thomas Girton. He invited them to come to his home in the evenings in the winter. So they drew by candlelight, and they literally copied from the drawings in his collection. And they were paid a small amount and given a supper of oysters for their trouble. So it was a great learning experience for artists like Turner to be given access to the work of well-established artists, as well as Cozzens. Another artist was John Henderson. And you can see the work on the right, which is not in our collection, just to be aware of that. It's in the National Galleries of Scotland. But that is copied after a work by Henderson, and it's Old Dover Harbour. But on the left, just to the left of that, the waterfront at Old Dover Harbour, that is from our own collection. And interestingly, it's thought now, and there's a man called Greg Smith, an academic and scholar, who's done a huge amount of work on Thomas Girton. And in fact, he has published his research. It's all available on a website, which is called thomasgirton.com. It's well worth a look. But he has proposed that these works, the ones we're looking at on the screen, the two views of Dover, that these were a collaborative process, that Girton and Turner worked closely together when they were attending Dr. Munro's Academy, as it was known. And so the idea was, well, not the idea, apparently Girton drew the outlines and Turner washed in the lovely blue-grey watercolor. So we are considering actually changing the attribution of these works and giving them to both Turner and Girton. Now, we haven't done that yet. We haven't changed the catalogue records, but it's something that we're actively thinking about because the research by Greg Smith is very persuasive. Oh yes, and I mentioned John Robert Cozzens. So he had 7 sketchbooks from his tour of he had 2 tours, 1782 and 1783. He went to Italy with a wealthy patron, William Beckford, and he made a huge number of monochrome sketches of the scenery he saw. And Turner / Girton, they made their copies after those works. So just here's 2 examples, one from the National Galleries of Scotland and one is from our own collection, because Turner himself didn't get to Italy until 1819 actually, and he didn't get to Europe until 1802. So definitely not drawn from life, the work on either of these works. So Turner, his work is really diverse, as I mentioned, and we have a couple of really detailed watercolors, like this one here, the Westgate Canterbury from 1794. So he's about 19 when this work was created. He had been, he had started to make drawings for publication. So the Copperplate magazine was one of the publications that commissioned him, or sort of, I suppose, bought his drawings and reproduced them as engravings. And of course, in England and Ireland at the end of the 18th century, there was a huge resurgence of interest in history and heritage, and antiquarianism, as it was called, was rife. So there was both professionals like George Petrie in Ireland, who was making drawings of old sites and monuments and so on. And also amateur artists were going around the country and making sketches. And then artists like Turner, very much professional and sketching and drawing old buildings, architectural heritage, and so on. But this is a truly magnificent watercolor, and I'm so glad we have it in our collection because it shows Turner at the outset of his career, but how brilliant he was even at that early stage, you know, in his late teens. So he's showing the massive building, a Norman gate into the city of Canterbury. But he, you know, aside from that, it's not boring in any sense because he shows this lovely rundown little lean-to that sits in the foreground. And you can see, I love that man. I've just blown up the detail there so you can see the man standing, sort of looking slightly bored, waiting for customers, perhaps. He could be he might be well, he's a workman of some description. There's in the background you can see that round object beside the barrel. That seems to be a knife grinding tool. So he, you know, we're not sure what sort of a repairman or workman he was, but this is probably his little shop. And you can see then the hatch where people might have come up and passed in knives they needed sharpened or something like that. But beautiful detail. And down just below in the water, if you like, underneath that rock, sort of to the left of the bockety wooden fence, you'll see Turner's name, Turner, Turn, and then a sort of an unusual Greek E, which is larger than the rest of the letters, and then or. And Turner used this version of his signature just for a very short period. And I think it was probably, he did it like this to distinguish himself from other Turners. There was another Turner working in Bristol, I think. So, you know, he's setting out his stall in terms of what he could do with the watercolor technique, but he's also drawing attention to his name and the fact that he's different from any other Turner who was working at the time. Another beautiful detail, just if you see in the main image, is the carriage just going across the bridge and right through, it'll go through the gate. So there's a sense of energy, a sense of, you know, capturing a moment in time with this watercolor. So Kent, you know, was one trip. So he would have traveled right throughout England and Wales and into Scotland. And it was in 1801 that he made his first trip north and got up as far as Scotland. And I'm just showing you two works, the one on the right from our own collection, the one on the left. It's not such a good photograph actually, because our photograph obviously looks beautiful, but both of these works are from the same tour. And the Falls of Clyde is south of Edinburgh. He would have visited the falls, which was a great tourist attraction, on his way back down, having been up in Glasgow and many other places up in Scotland. I suppose sometimes it's difficult for us to imagine how, you know, what an arduous journey it was for artists or just anyone traveling in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, because of course there were no trains. no planes, obviously. So, you would have had to go by a mail coach usually, bumping along, probably squashed in with a lot of other people in the carriage. And the journey from London to Scotland, if you kind of went straight and didn't stop, would take about 60 hours. So, it was a multiple day trip. And Turner would have broken the trip in different places along the way. So you saw in the last few works the incredible detail, in the Westgate, Canterbury, and so on. Now it is at this point in 1801 that Turner kind of changes. He becomes his own man, if you like, as an artist. So he begins experimenting, and his absolute interest is to capture weather effects, the effect of water, the effect of a huge stream or river in space, torrenting down over a waterfall, as in the Falls of Clyde there, and how the mist rises, how that the water vapor rises, and how it creates this very particular atmosphere. And then in our work, Edinburgh, the view of Edinburgh from below Arthur's Seat, what he's interested here is capturing how the rain coming in over the city, he actually captures how the rain looks, which is incredibly difficult to do, but you get the sense that it hasn't yet reached him in this nice plain here with the cows, unconcerned, munching away or drinking. But that weather is going to come and move across. But you can see the mist in the valley there, and it's just really evocative imagery. One of the reasons why he traveled very extensively in Britain at this time was because Europe was basically closed. There was an ongoing war with France, so travel into mainland Europe really wasn't possible at this stage. So he did a lot of traveling within the United Kingdom. He did, though, in 1802, when the Treaty of Amiens was announced, he literally hot-footed it across the English Channel and into France, and then on to Switzerland. He was very excited to experience the mountains and the Alps and the different scenery, the great rivers of Europe, and so on. And he made great use of his time on this. He had a few weeks in Europe in 1802. Of course, then hostilities began again, and he wasn't able to get back until I think about 1819. But one of the amazing results of that tour was a watercolor in our collection on the left, the Reichenbach Falls. You might be familiar with it from, well, it was famously mentioned by Arthur Conan Doyle in his Sherlock Holmes series. Of course, Holmes was killed at the Reichenbach Falls. But yeah, so what he would do on these trips is make lots of very quick pencil sketches, and then later work them up. So, but I think that our watercolor on the left there probably was done in part on the spot, because he brought with him on that tour what were known as roll sketchbooks. It was quite large sheets of paper. You see the size there. And he had, in advance, painted them or washed them with kind of a dove gray. So he gave them a color, and then he worked into it. But this is it has a real sense of immediacy. And if your eyesight is really good, and mine isn't, but you might be able to spot on the little, what would I say, sort of hill on the left, there are two tiny figures. That's one reason, if you can at all, do come in and see the watercolors here in the National Gallery in January, because they are incredible. The detail is amazing. And in this work, you'll actually be able to see a thumbprint right in the center of the watercolor, because of course Turner amazingly just used, as I said, whatever he had to hand. So he uses his fingers and thumbs to to mix the paint and to create certain marks, and also the sort of whitish lines you can see, which are well, particularly actually in the waterfall. He got that very bright white by actually scratching back into the paper using his thumbnail which apparently he grew long for that purpose. But he also sometimes used the end of a brush and just, scratched back. On the right then, just to mention, so that is a study, but the finished watercolor, which he exhibited in his own gallery, which he opened in 1804. So he was very successful from an early age and a really good businessman. But he opened his own gallery in 1804, and this was one of the magnificent pieces on display. And you can see from the dimensions, it's actually a good bit bigger, probably double the size of our study, which in itself is quite a good size for a watercolor. But this was an exhibition piece, and this would have been framed in a gilded frame and shown on the wall like an oil painting. So I think it maybe gives you a sense of how Turner used those very simple pencil sketches, then worked them up with color, and then finally in the studio later, in this case 2 years later, made a very finished watercolor. And he also exhibited it in 1815 at the Royal Academy as well. Now I need to speed up because I'm running behind time, but there's so many things to say about everything. I'll try not to speak too fast, but I won't go into too much detail. But I just wanted to show you this oil painting, which is in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. It's of a different waterfall in the Alps that are in Switzerland that he would have seen on the same trip. And again, this is a very finished watercolor that came out of all those studies and sketches and the simple works that he had done on the spot when he was on his tour. So as well as doing very large scale oil paintings and finished watercolors for exhibition, he was also creating works, as he had done much earlier, as we saw with the Canterbury image. This was an image, a painting done to be translated into print. And this is A Ship Against the Mewstone. It's a really tiny work when you see it in the flesh. It's a little bigger than postcard size, maybe one of those larger postcards. This was done for a series of engravings called Picturesque Views on the Southern Coast of England. And he did a whole lot of work. So he traveled all around the South Coast. Again, Europe was closed off, so he was concentrating on views within England. And this one is from 1814. And again, here he's created the waves by scratching back into the paper, allowing the white to shine through. But you can see his enjoyment in creating these, magnificent storm clouds rolling over the Mewstone, which notoriously claimed many lives over the centuries. And just to stay with the theme of stormy seas and shipwrecks, we have the result of awful, dangerous coastlines here with Hastings, a shipwreck off Hastings. The work on the right was probably intended for another engraving series called The Ports of England. It was never published, as it turned out. But then above, you can just see how his sketches and studies, he used them sometimes, later, quite a long time later, to inform more finished works. And then just to remind you that, National Galleries of Scotland have similarly beautiful works. I just wanted to show you two works on blue paper. Our work, of course, is on the right, Petworth Park. And he did a huge series of gouache studies on blue paper when he was based in Petworth from 1827 and into 1828. Excuse me. He started using blue paper around this time for gouache. And he's, cleverly using the paper itself as one of the colors within the composition. He had been commissioned by the owner of Petworth Park, George O'Brien Wyndham. He'd been invited to paint or commissioned to paint 4 oil paintings for the grand carved room in the house. But he spent months at a time there. And in fact, Wyndham actually, gave him a room to use as a studio. And members of the family would go up and watch him at work. he traveled basically every summer from 1819. He traveled into Europe. And this, we have three watercolors from that depict the Val d'Aosta, and National Galleries of Scotland have four. And he went back, sorry, he made multiple studies of the same valley, which he was very inspired by. And these are just two, but you can imagine there's quite a lot more. David Hill is a scholar based in, I think he's in the University of Lancaster. And he did a lot of work on this tour and discovered, because we had different titles that just came to us from a long time before, but he has given us pretty exact titles, and he has backed up his arguments with photographs and so on. So we're quite confident with the titles of these works. And again, sorry, I should have the caption below, but our one on the right is also Châtel Argent above Villeneuve. And you can see the Tour Colline on the right, and the castle itself up on the high hill overlooking the town or the village below. Again, this is one of my favorites. It's so modernist, it's so incredible. And Turner, this work was never designed, or he would never have imagined it would be on show in a gallery and people poring over it and going, oh, wow. Because for him, this was just a study. This was a means to an end. He was experimenting. He was in the mountains, and he was trying to get a sense of the bulk of the alpine landscape and the way the mist came through the valleys and so on. But it is quite incredible. And you can see it's work like this that it's the reason why artists, like the Impressionists and Mark Rothko and so on, were so inspired by Turner, because there's a wonderful abstract quality about it, and I suppose, a love of the materiality of the paint, very visible here. Now, just over the next few minutes towards the end, last 10 minutes or so, I just want to tell you about some of the other works we have in the collection, in the exhibition this year. So the first two rooms will all be the Turner watercolors, the 31 Von Bequest watercolors. But in the last room, we have 13 works by other artists who are very inspired by Turner in different ways. So their works are very, very different, and you won't see well, with this, maybe you see a direct connection, but with others, maybe not. And I'll just talk you through a few of them now over the last few minutes. So, and it also gives a chance to show other works by Turner. On the left, obviously, is one of his Venetian scenes. His brilliance in giving a sense of atmosphere. It's very clear here. Excuse me. And on the right, then, Hercules Brabazon, an amazing name. He was an English artist, a well-to-do man, so he didn't have to be a professional. He didn't have to make his living from his art, but he was pretty talented. In fact, John Singer Sargent organized his very first solo show when he was 72 in London. But he was painting for many years before that, and he was incredibly inspired by Turner. He went to all the places that Turner had painted, and he did his work in quite a different way. Obviously, it's a different style, but again, trying to capture the atmosphere of the place. So we have two works in this exhibition. One is of Lucerne and the Venetian image here. Both through when, during Turner's lifetime, there were artists who were trying to emulate his work, and also, of course, after his death. And Burgess, an Irish artist, he was creating imagery that, was very, very close to Turner's, I suppose. And this is a view in Northern Ireland of the very famous Giant's Causeway, of course. And again, you can see the connections, showing the shipwreck or the bits of the wreck in the foreground, and the very detailed paint work, tiny little brush strokes to create the sea and the clouds and so on. And again, this is a work that definitely merits, if you can, coming in and seeing it up close. It's quite a large watercolor, and I just juxtaposed it with the Turner work, Clovelly Bay, which is much smaller in scale. I know on the screen it's hard to get a sense of the size of works, but Clovelly Bay is really very tiny with incredible detail. And it's from 1822. It would have been part of the Picturesque Views on the Southern Coast of England as well, part of that print series. So I'll just show you the next one. Oh yeah, you've seen Hastings, but John Faulkner was an Irish artist who again was inspired by Turner, and many artists, were trying to get a sense of, cloud formations. Faulkner used quite a lot of impasto paint, so quite thick paint, to create the white on the darker colors and so on. And so this is Inishkea Isle, which in fact means Inishgay. So it was Goose Island. So probably the geese landed there maybe on their migration. And this place is northwest of Achill in Mayo. And the next one, oh yeah, I just wanted to put this in because it's so magnificent. But this idea of capturing sunset, or how the clouds were, this is something that many artists picked up on, including Walter William May. Obviously, very different style, less expressive, less sort of experimental, I suppose, but really beautiful in terms of how the artist captures the light in the sky and the beauty. So, I mean, the works I've included, definitely Turner is there in the background, and we know that artists were looking to him constantly. So, there isn't direct connection with many of them, but you can see, I hope, the inspiration. And I'm not showing you all the works in the exhibition. Leave something as a surprise. So there are two contemporary artists in the show as well. And one of them is Jennifer Lane. She's a printmaker who has worked a lot with Graphic Studio Dublin. And in 1998, she was commissioned, along with a number of other Graphic Studio gallery artists, to create an image inspired by work from the collection. And she chose the Montjovet from below Saint Vincent in the Val d'Aosta, another of Turner's works from that 1836 tour. And at first glance, you might say, oh, there's no connection. But if you look carefully, you can see, if you just focus on the shapes in the shapes of the mountains and the valley in Turner's watercolor, and you can see that Jennifer Lane has just taken that and sort of made it her own, if you like. This is a wood block print on Japanese paper, so very contemporary, very modern, and yet she's harking back to Turner, maybe with the do you see the sort of white line? It looks like it's gouged out, a bit like how he would have done it with his with the end of a paintbrush, but very simple, very pared back quality to this print. And she calls it Homage to Turner, which is really quite nice. So it was part of the Art into Art exhibition, which was put on in the print gallery here in 1998. And last few slides now. You may have been here in 2018 when we had a wonderful show called Good Morning, Mr. Turner. This was work by Neil Nassans, which was hung alongside the Vaughan Bequest of Turner watercolors that year. And Neil had come to me a few years before, saying he had been inspired by Turner for many, many years, and he proposed an exhibition or display. And it came to pass, it happened. And I just showing you on the screen there, his studio down in West Kerry. I went down when he had most of the work made to see what it was looking like. And I was just blown away, because Neil has a very distinctive style of work. And yet his interest in nature and his interest in capturing the weather and the effects of mist and rain and snow and so on has great connections with Turner. And you can just see on the bottom there the plate that the print above was made from. Yeah, and this is one. So in the exhibition this time, we have the artist's book that he made for the 2018 show. This is one of the prints from that book, and it's a directly inspired by Turner. It's taken from a little gouache study that Turner made when he was in Petworth, and Neil Nassans has used it and kind of changed it around a little bit. It's called Artist Painting in Front of Admirers. And just on the screen there, you can see this is Neil Nassans' own work, what he felt and why he wanted to do this. He called it a room share, which I thought was quite nice. And obviously he was paying homage to Turner with this work. Yes, now I'm just putting this up. You're probably going, why is there no image? There is a beautiful image that the work that Neil made this work from, and it's on Tate's website. Amazingly, there are kind of very high charges for images, so we aren't always able to use images from Tate. I would have liked to put in works from Tate's collection, but anyway, you can follow this up yourself, hopefully, if you're interested, and you'll see it's a very colourful gouache work. So this is the artist's book, and this is some of the other works within the 13 items, and I will have a selection of them on display for the exhibition. And again, I'm just going back to Turner, because Neil Nassans, living in West Kerry, it's the weather which often makes things very exciting and dramatic. And, he captures that in his work, as Turner did in A Shower Over Water. And again, this is so abstract. It's really quite incredible. You just get a sense of the agitated water in those, zigzaggy black lines, and then the sun just appearing from behind this curtain of cloud. I mean, really kind of miraculously done, just using paint and brushes and so on. Now, traditionally, this image is thought to be maybe somewhere Lake Lucerne, but in fact, Ian Worrell, he's a Turner expert. He thinks it possibly could be Margate, so it could show the sea. So basically, we don't know, but regardless, it's a very beautiful thing. And then I just wanted to show you after this, Neil's image of a West Kerry mountain, Cahir Conry, with a shower of hail coming in over. So, I mean, they're radically different in terms of style, and yet nature and the weather and so on is what motivated both artists, and why I think it worked so well having Neil's work in the same space as JMW Turner's. So that's more or less it. I just want to mention that if you are in the gallery in April, you could, and this is, this is the only graphite, simple pencil drawing in the collection with a beautiful flourishing monogram down below. And I did want to emphasize that the exhibition, because it's only open for the month of January, and that's because of the conditions of Vaughan's bequest, we can't have it open on Sunday, the 1st of February. So don't come over. Don't come to the gallery on the 1st of February hoping that it will be up, because it won't. We'll have closed the doors, and we will have put the works back in their beautiful cabinet that's behind me here now. So yeah, opens Thursday, the 1st of January, and closes on Saturday, the 31st. And as I said, if you do want to see a few oils by JMW Turner, you can come back in April. We have an exhibition called William Blake, The Age of Romantic Fantasy, which does include some works by JMW Turner, and it's a loan exhibition from Tate. So yeah, it might be interesting to see Turner and Blake, together and in the company of other artists with lots of incredibly dramatic and exciting works. So thank you very much. I'll leave that up on the screen maybe, and Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Anne, for that. Actually, if you could take that off the screen, that would be
Yes,
great. It would make it easier for people to see our interpreters
of course.
when we can. That is
Sorry.
great.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes.
And thanks for the dates. That's great. I read somewhere this morning it might have been online, but it may have been an internal document. The 1st of January is a Thursday. We normally open late on a Thursday. We won't be opening late on that day. It's normal hours, so that's 5:30 p.m. is the closing for that day. But that's
Good to
great
know.
that it's really clear. And we also have lots of other programming associated with this exhibition, which you can find on our website. One that's always hugely popular because of very limited places is our weekend painting course. This year, artist Dave West will be doing that on the last weekend in January. There's only 10 places available. I think there's already been a few bookings. That's on our website now for anybody who really wants to feel personally feel that inspiration that Turner gave to so many artists and be one of those artists themselves. You'll be with Quivon, my colleague, for a talk and tea at some point in January as well, and
Yeah.
there'll be an online conversation in Irish, a Kirkle Cora, that we'll be having, as well as other things and tours and things like that. So very much looking forward to it. I mentioned earlier, if anyone has any questions, pop them in the question and answer box. There's none now, but as I said as well, there will be, like, if you do have any questions for us, get in touch. education@ngi.ie is the education address, and we can get those questions to the right people. So I think, Anne, we'll leave it there. I'm so excited to see the show. I know it's really taking shape. It's nearly there now. But we'll
Yeah,
be opening.
absolutely. We're literally hanging as we speak. So the our wonderful art handling team are doing that work, and our paper conservators are making sure that the lights are at the right levels and so on. So
Fantastic.
everything will be perfect for the 1st of January.
I can't wait to see it, and I'm really looking forward to seeing some of those teeny tiny details if my eyes will let me. They're getting
Bring
worse.
your magnifying glass, Joanne.
I will. Absolutely. Thank you so much, and thanks to Orla and Ella who have done the interpreting for us. And thank you all for joining us today. That was a super talk, and Emer's just saying thank you for a great talk there, Anne. And yeah, we hope to see you all in the gallery in January. And thank you so much. Bye bye.
Bye.